Bubbycast.
Hey, Bubba.
What is up? Bubbycast number 8. We are back.
The long-awaited, the sequel to the critically acclaimed Bubbycast episode 7. We went on a brief hiatus. We had to gather inspiration from other sources. Tour Europe. We spent 6 months in Budapest.
Well, speak about adventures
and quests. Let me ask you, dear listener, what comes to mind? That's right, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. We have officially finished the game. Now we are ready for the complete, definitive review.
Someone has been asleep for over 100 years.
That's right. It's Link.
Link wakes up and he is given a smart device.
He's basically given the iPhone 8, and then he has to take pictures and stuff. It's the move. It's what can I say? I normally am against corporate sponsorships in video games, but you know, Apple just really sold me. If Link can use it to defeat the evils of Hyrule, then I guess it's good enough for me to go on Reddit and take pictures and stuff. The story is it follows the same Zelda formula you're probably used to if you've played any other game. You have nothing. There's an evil presence. You gotta stop it. What better way to do that? Go to some dungeons and find some friends and fight evil along the way and stuff. That's the same basic premise. In this game, it's like the 4, super heroes, the Avengers of the basically the Legend of Zelda Avengers. You gotta just like get the gang back together. Except they're all dead. So, obviously that's going to be a problem, but luckily they're like spirits or whatever, and they're like, here, just take my powers. So you get the 4 powers, and then you go fight the Ganondorf.
Which, honestly, looks absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, I think Ganon in this game probably is one of the scarier iterations. He's just like, the whole time before that, he's just like this scary-looking smoke snake monster flying off in the distance.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you get to the final boss, you finally have the Master Sword and your gear and your levels and you're ready to go. He's like this absolutely grotesque half-pig, half-spider monster.
Mm-hmm.
And then he ends up being a super big pig. And you gotta fight the pig with the light bow. Is that this game? I kind of forget. I think that's the thing. There's the final boss stage is very intense, pretty difficult, honestly, for in regards to Zelda games.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely had some trouble on this one, but the story itself, like when you look at like the storyline, there's no real complaints with it. I guess it's a solid story. What ties into more, I think, is how the gameplay works. I think the gameplay is the biggest focus in this game.
I agree.
Compared to like any other Zelda game, your ability to free roam is just unprecedented.
Mm-hmm. And I also like how the gameplay is a really great mix between Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, because I really liked how in Wind Waker, every time you would hit an enemy, it would kind of like freeze the frame, and then it would go on for the full animation. And you get like the feeling of that, like the freeze frame hit with like the cartoony-ish particle effect that happens.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very fluid, like in Twilight Princess.
Combat is very satisfying because of that. Because, as Garrett was saying, that freeze frame effect, it makes it so that you feel like your attacks are actually really doing some damage. And then just like the open world was sort of touched upon in like Wind Waker and Twilight Princess each did this in their own ways, but this game truly is just a massive open world game, and there's so much content to do. Me and Garrett have both completely beaten the main story, and we've done a significant amount of side quests, and there's still so much content that we have left to do. And with the expansion pass that's coming out, which is new to the Legend of Zelda, but isn't really done in an intrusive way. There's even more content to be had.
Mm-hmm.
What's in your opinion the best thing this game does, gameplay wise?
I think gameplay wise is the overall movement feels very fluid.
Mm-hmm.
And it's even cool how you can move in slow motion when you're in midair.
Mm-hmm.
It's so sick landing those midair slow-mo shots
Yeah.
on like some of these enemies with like your just overpowered like hero bow.
Mm-hmm.
Just headshotting some moblins.
Mm-hmm. I personally have thought that bow and arrow gameplay has always been one of the most satisfying parts of Legend of Zelda, and in this game, it's just absolutely fantastic. I don't think there's been a Legend of Zelda game that's had a more satisfying bow and arrow, especially because if you jump in midair, it slow mos and you're in the and you go in this bullet time effect, and you can just get these critical shots and these headshots, and it is just absolutely sick.
There's even a part where it slow-mos on the ground, which is sick. You do that perfectly timed backflip or side jump to either side, and you just go into like the flurry strike, which is absolutely sick if you fully powered your Master Sword, or even, while talking about Ganon, even during the Ganon fight. That's how you would get him down when he was, I think, when he was at quarter health. He turns into that glowing magma exoskeleton he has around him. And that's the only way you hit him, is if you do a perfectly timed dodge into a flurry strike. And just the particle effects of the Master Sword like hitting something at like full charge when it's fully charged is just absolutely sick.
Mm-hmm. And what feels so good as a player about it is that it's not easy to do. It's not something that with like no effort you could just, it's not just some one button, oh there it is. Like it takes a bit of timing, and you're not going to hit it every time, so that makes it even more satisfying when you're able to pull off these really hard, really difficult but satisfying combos to just melt someone. And tying into how the gameplay works is just how the game looks itself. Graphically, this is one of the most beautiful Legend of Zelda games. The map variety is just absolutely insane. The map is so big. You go from areas, there's like an entire snowy mountain range with zero visibility. There's like this dense tropical rainforest. There's like this beach village. There's, of course, Hyrule Castle itself. You see, like, the remains, the ruins of buildings and towns sort of scattered throughout the world. Great setting. There's such variety throughout the game, and the graphics are just absolutely spot on. It's not necessarily like a hyper-realistic graphic style or a completely cartoony. It's this mix that is just absolutely perfect for this style of game.
And it's also perfect for lower-end hardware, like the Wii U, which I'm really glad that it was able to look nearly as good as the Nintendo Switch version, which I didn't get it on the Nintendo Switch. The Breath of the Wild, I got it on the Wii U, and I was just happy they didn't just, give it a second-hand port, if you know what I mean, for the Wii U version. And it looks great, and it plays very well. Because as Zelda fans would come used to, it's just that 30 FPS lock. And for the most part, it stays there.
Mm-hmm. There are some frame dips, but overall, it's nothing that's, like, intrusive. Like, you might notice it sometimes, but in regards to, like, combat and all the important parts, it's not going to be dipping much.
Mm-hmm. And you also think, like, I'm thinking how insane it is that they could pull off this just open world on the Wii U. So when those dips happen, I kind of just, like, don't really care about them, because I know this system is being pushed to its absolute limit. Like, yeah. It's pretty insane.
It's honestly a technological marvel that this thing can run even half as good as it looks.
Yeah.
And then the designs of some of the enemies and some of the temples are really creative, like in a way that isn't done. Like each of the four the Avenger temples is basically modeled after it's like a big stone animal. There's a bird, this giraffe-esque creature, a elephant, and then a salamander. And each of them has this own creative interaction of how you actually go through the dungeon, and it's gameplay that's so fresh that I don't think any other game has really been able to do. No other game that I've played so far has been able to mesh both the solid gameplay of like a third person like sword fighting game that Zelda has and that type of combat with this intricate puzzle like design of maps in such a seamless way that they both can interact and work well together.
And I never found it too difficult with the Divine Beasts, or the...
As they were, the Avenger Temples.
The Avenger Temples.
Normally, music in the Legend of Zelda universe, of course, the music is iconic and important. And in this game, it sort of takes more of a backseat role. I would say there's probably not as many immediately recognizable songs. I think after you play through, I'd be hard pressed to like sing a couple melodies off my head, but when you're in the game, it's sort of to tie into this feeling of like expansive open world, this like very solitary type quest that you as Link have. It's a very atmospheric soundtrack that really is the most appropriate one.
I agree. When you're riding your horse through like the tall blades of grass, it's just like a perfect piano melody to just keep you calm before you go into a next battle. And as soon as the battle kicks in,
or if you run into some tough enemies along the road, it sort of gives you a moment to like just reflect and take in all the scenery that the game provides. Let's sit down with Mr. List and my associate, Mr. List. How do you rank games that are all critically acclaimed? Me, I still don't think. I sat down long and hard, as is demonstrated by the fact that it's been months in between Bubbycast 7 and 8. But I still personally think that Twilight Princess is the best Legend of Zelda. I think, however, that Breath of the Wild is my number 2. And number 3, likely Wind Waker. Or Link to the Past.
That's pretty good. Breath of the Wild, for me, is number 1.
Number 1.
Number 2, Skyward Sword.
Oh.
Number 3.
That's a controversial opinion. I don't agree with that.
Ocarina of Time.
Okay. That's fair enough. Skyward Sword number 2. Oh. I would have a hard time finding... I don't even know if you could find anyone else with that opinion. But I respect it.
Dude, the final boss...
An Ocarina of Time when you boys was still in diapers.
Kid. Yeah, I'm sorry, sir. We're going to have to cut that from the audio. Alright, Garrett. We're going to have to recut it all.
It was the final boss that made Skyward Sword jump to my number 2. I mean, how cool is fighting Demise...
Basically
Ganon, in a mirror world, dude. And personally, the motion controls worked well for me, and it wasn't too difficult. So, when you stuck up the Master Sword, and a flippin' lightning bolt hit it, and you had to throw it at Demise, and it would be a volley back and forth of lightning bolts, that was, I mean... It was just sick. It was probably one of the most engaging final bosses or endings that I've played.
Mm-hmm.
And also, just like, that goes for all of the gameplay-wise, at least for Skyward Sword, because I just got used to combat and liked it.
Mm-hmm.
So...
I think that's where you would find the split. It's like, I personally, not a huge fan of motion controls, but I can respect, like you said, how it is a very intuitive and engaging way to play. I prefer controller, but... I respect the opinion. I think that is a reasonable argument.
And when you're in midair, and you're doing the final blow to Ganon, and the lightning bolt hits the Master Sword mid-flip, and you strike down on Ganon, I mean, dude.
Yeah. I think the Skyward Sword fight, as much as I am not a huge fan of Skyward Sword as a game, I think that final fight is just absolutely the best fight. Like Garrett said, there's no level that can top after this long, difficult fight, getting this flip in midair right as he's weak, and a lightning bolt strikes the Master Sword, and then you pierce it down. There's nothing that comes close. And I say that as someone who absolutely loves many of the Legend of Zelda games. There's just nothing else. So let's sum it all up. This game is an absolute modern masterpiece. It's definitely one of the best games out of the past 3 years, I'd say. I think if you check any reviews of what people think, you'd be hard-pressed to find anything under an 8, and that's like really if people are cherry-picking, but I personally would give this game a 10 out of 10. It's a masterpiece.
Pop the champagne. Well, do you have your Legend of Zelda checklist ready? So you check off the gameplay, you check off the story, you check off the music,
Check.
and you check off the graphics. No X's.
No X's.
This game is dead on 10.
Yeah, you're really hard-pressed to find complaints, I would say. Well, thank you for tuning in to this extra long review episode of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Bubby. And that's the show. We'll see you in another 8 months.
Thank you so much, by the way.
Thank you, and